The smell of charcoal was thick in the air, mingling with the cheap beer my dad insisted on buying Evan, though I'd paid for everything else. The burgers, the salads, the paper plates. It was all from my wallet, for a party happening in my own backyard. I was balancing a fresh platter of food, trying to weave through the cheerful chaos when I heard her voice. It belonged to my sister Ashley, the family's beautiful, dramatic golden child, who could charm her way out of any responsibility and into anyone's wallet. She was holding court with her new boyfriend, laughing as she spoke. She gestured vaguely toward the house, my house, and with a casual flick of her wrist, she delivered the line that would change everything. "It's a great setup," she said, her voice carrying easily across the lawn. "My parents and I live here, and my sister, the one who just brought you that burger, she gets to stay with us rent-free." The words just hung there in the humid air. I saw my mother, Linda, a woman who has spent her life acting as her daughter's press secretary, spinning every fault into a virtue. She heard it. I know she did. But she just offered a weak, non-committal smile and looked away. In that instant, everything went quiet. The chatter of the party, the sizzle of the grill, it all just faded into a low, dull roar in my ears. My hand froze, the platter suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. It wasn't the blatant lie that finally broke something inside of me. It was the casual, confident delivery. It was the absolute assumption that my contribution was so meaningless it could be completely erased and inverted for her own social credit. I was not a person, just a resource, a background character in the story of her life. I didn't yell. I didn't drop the platter and make a scene. I just turned around, walked back into the kitchen, and set the food down on the counter. I moved through the house like a ghost, the sound of their laughter echoing from the yard behind me. Each step up the stairs to my room was a beat in a silent, final drum roll. And the worst part? This wasn't a new lie, just a louder one. It was the final confirmation of a story they had all agreed on a long time ago. I was a guest in my own life. To understand why that one comment at the BBQ was the final straw. You have to understand that the house was never theirs to offer. It was mine. It wasn't a gift from my parents. It was a final, desperate act of protection from my grandmother. My dad's mom? She was a woman with kind eyes but a spine of steel, and she saw the dynamic in our family with perfect, painful clarity. I remember her squeezing my hand a few months before she passed, her voice thin but firm. "You're the only one I can trust with this, honey," she'd said. "You have a good head on your shoulders. Don't let them walk all over you." Her will was her last attempt to give me a foundation, a piece of the world that was mine alone. When I inherited the house outright at 22, the shock on my parents' and Ashley's faces was something to behold. For a brief moment, the power dynamic shifted, and they looked at me differently. But guilt is a powerful weapon, especially when you've been trained your whole life to feel it. So I made a deal, a verbal agreement born from my own misplaced sense of duty. They could all continue to live there, and I would handle the crippling property taxes. All I asked in return was that they pay the utilities and handle the basic upkeep of the place. It was a kindness they immediately rebranded as an arrangement. And then, eventually, as their right, the pattern of my invisibility and Ashley's hypervisibility was carved into every major family event. I'll never forget the year Ashley decided she was going to be an influencer. She sold our parents on this grand vision of herself as a brand, a creative force. They didn't just encourage her. They bankrolled the entire fantasy, co-signing a loan for $15,000. The boxers started arriving daily, a top-of-the-line MacBook, expensive camera gear, bags and bags of designer clothes for her content. For 3 months, our lives were a backdrop for her endless photo shoots. Then, as always, the passion fizzled out, replaced by a sigh of boredom. "It was all too much work," she declared. She sold the gear for pennies on the dollar, using the cash to fund a spontaneous trip to Bali with her friends, and left our parents holding the bag on the loan. I heard my mother on the phone explaining it away. It was an investment in her happiness, she'd said, as if that settled it. Just a year before that, I had a medical issue that required a procedure with a $2,000 copay. I remember staring at the bill, my stomach in knots. I finally worked up the nerve to ask for help, calling my father, Mark, a man who worships his daughter's whims and views my independence not as a strength, but as an excuse to ignore my needs entirely. His response was so predictable, so practiced. "Honey, you're the responsible one. You've got savings," he said, his voice full of that tired, paternal disappointment he reserved just for me. "We're a little tight right now." Tight, I thought, because you just paid off Ashley's maxed out credit card for the 3rd time this year. The internal ledger clicked another entry into place. I didn't argue, I just hung up, logged into my bank account, and drained the savings I had worked so hard to build. It was a quiet, lonely surrender, the price of being the capable one. This was the false narrative our family ran on, the unspoken constitution that governed our lives. Ashley was sensitive and creative, which was code for she was volatile and unaccountable. Her feelings were precious, delicate things that had to be protected at all costs, even if it meant going into debt or ignoring reality. I, on the other hand, was the strong one. I was capable and so responsible, but those words weren't compliments. They were justifications for their neglect. My competence wasn't a trait to be proud of. It was a cage. It was the reason I could be left to handle things on my own. The reason my needs were always secondary. The reason I could be expected to give everything and ask for nothing in return. They weren't just enabling her. They were actively punishing me for not being a problem. Lying in my bed that night, listening to the party rage on without me, I finally accepted it. They weren't just taking me for granted. They were actively rewriting reality to erase me. And I realized the only way to make them see the truth was to make it completely unavoidable. I woke up the next morning, and the emotional storm inside me was gone. There was no anger, no tears, no churning grief, just a cold, quiet clarity that settled deep in my bones. The goal was no longer to win their love or make them see my worth. The goal was simply to get my life back. While the sounds of them sleeping off the party echoed softly through the halls, I packed a small suitcase with my most important things. Every movement was deliberate and silent. I walked out the front door without looking back and checked into the cheapest, cleanest motel I could find. It smelled of bleach and anonymity. It was perfect. For the next 3 days, I operated like a machine. The hurt was packed away, replaced by a methodical focus on gathering the receipts of my erasure. I went to the county clerk's office for a certified copy of the house deed, the paper feeling heavy and real in my hands. I sat at the small motel desk as my printer hummed, spitting out years of property tax statements, the grand total running into 6 figures. I even dug out the old, frayed file of utility shutoff notices I'd had to rush to pay. I scrolled through years of texts, my thumb stopping on a perfect crystalline example of the dynamic. My message about a plumber for a worsening leak met with my mother's swift reply, "Can it wait? Ashley needs 4 new tires." Spreading the documents across the cheap motel bedspread, my plan formed with absolute precision. There would be no screaming matches, no dramatic confrontations. I was done with their brand of emotional theater. This would be a clean, legal, and final severance. I researched real estate agents and found the one with a citywide reputation for being fast, efficient, and unsentimental. My call to her was brief and professional. I wanted to list the house as an AZS cash preferred, quick close sale. My instructions were ironclad. She was to communicate only with me. Under no circumstances was my family to be consulted or informed. The realtor, a shark in a blazer, just nodded, her eyes gleaming with the promise of a fast commission. She agreed to my terms without question. I signed the listing agreement right there in her office, my signature clear and firm. There was no glee, no surge of vengeful energy, just the quiet hum of a machine being set in motion. The plan was out of my hands now. By the time I signed the listing agreement with the realtor, I felt nothing but a profound sense of calm. The house went on the market on Tuesday. By Friday, we had a cash offer well over asking. I signed the counteroffer. The clock was now ticking, and they had no idea they were already homeless. I let an hour of their frantic messages go by before I responded to their group chat with a single, simple text. I would not be coming to the house. I told them to meet me the next day at 11 a.m. at a specific address downtown, a building that rented out small, sterile conference rooms by the hour. Their protests were immediate, but I didn't engage. I just repeated the time and address. The next morning, I arrived 20 minutes early. The room was just as I'd pictured it, cold, impersonal, with a long, polished table that reflected the fluorescent lights. I sat down at the head of the table and placed my meticulously organized binder in front of me. Then, I waited. They burst in exactly 3 minutes past 11, as if to make a point. The door swung open with a thud, and Ashley swept in first, her face already blotchy with performative tears. My parents followed, their faces masks of fury and betrayal. "What is the meaning of this?" my father bellowed, his voice bouncing off the bare walls. "There is a sale pending sign on our lawn." He was practically vibrating with rage, expecting me to shrink, to explain, to apologize. I stayed seated, my hands resting calmly on the table. I looked at all 3 of them and said, "Please, sit down." The quiet command seemed to stun them more than an outburst would have. They hesitated, then reluctantly took the seats opposite me. Ashley was the first to break the tense silence, her voice a high-pitched wail. "You can't do this. You can't. Sell my home." Her entire identity was built on the foundation of that house, and she looked at me as if I had personally set it on fire. I didn't respond with words. Instead, I reached for the first document in my binder. The certified copy of the house deed slid it smoothly across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of her. "Legally," I said, my voice low and steady, "it has never been your home. It's my house." My mother, seeing that histrionics weren't working, shifted to her preferred tactic, emotional manipulation. "But honey, we're family," she began, her voice softening into a wheedling, pleading tone. "We talked about this. You live here with us, rent-free." That was the line. The echo of the lie that started it all. Without breaking eye contact, I opened the binder to the next section and slid the entire thing across the table. It was filled with page after page of my property tax statements. The grand total over $70,000 highlighted in yellow at the top. "Does this look rent-free to you?" I asked. "Because I paid that alone." My father's face was turning a dangerous shade of red. He started sputtering about upkeep, about how they'd taken care of the place. "We held up our end of the bargain," he insisted. For that, I was also prepared. I pulled out the final stack of papers, the ignored repair quotes, the overdue utility bills I'd covered, and the damning text exchange. I laid them out one by one. "You let the roof leak into the attic for 6 months because Ashley wanted a new patio set," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "The water damage cost me thousands to repair. I paid for this roof, not you." That was the moment the entire narrative collapsed. The black and white proof on the table was irrefutable, a fortress that their years of gaslighting and denial could not breach. Ashley's performative sobs morphed into genuine, ugly gasps of disbelief as she stared at the deed with my name and, only my name in it. My mother just stared at the mountain of bills, her mouth slightly open, utterly speechless. All the color drained from my father's face, leaving it a pale, sickly gray. He finally understood. They had no argument. They had no power here. The silence in the room was absolute, thick with the weight of their shattered reality. I let it hang in the air for a long moment before delivering the final blow. "The house is sold," I said calmly. "The new owners take possession in 2 weeks. You will receive a formal notice to vacate from my lawyer. I suggest you start packing." And in the ringing silence of that sterile room, with their entire world dismantled on the conference table, I stood up. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just said, "I believe we're done here," and walked out the door. The 2 weeks that followed the confrontation were a war fought entirely on my phone screen. As soon as I walked out of that conference room, the barrage began. My phone became a hot stone of notifications, a relentless assault of their grief and rage. There were voicemails from my father, his voice tight with fury, making threats he had no power to enforce. Those were followed by tearful, gasping messages from my mother, oscillating wildly between telling me I was a monster and begging me to reconsider for the sake of the family. Ashley just sent a string of incoherent, emoji-filled texts that radiated pure, unfiltered indignation. Then came the flying monkeys. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly felt compelled to text me, calling me cruel, heartless, and selfish for what I was doing to my poor parents. They painted a picture of a loving family I had decided to destroy on a whim. With each incoming message, I performed a simple, cleansing ritual. I wouldn't listen to the full voicemail. I wouldn't read the entire sanctimonious paragraph from my aunt. I would just see the name, take a deep breath, and press block. One by one, their voices vanished from my life. While their world was imploding, mine was clicking neatly into place. The closing happened without a hitch. The money was wired directly into my account. It was all, finally, done. 1 year later, it's morning, and the sun is streaming through the large, sliding glass door of my own apartment, hitting the leaves of the monstera plant I've somehow managed to keep alive. The space is smaller than my old bedroom in the house, but it feels infinitely larger because every single inch of it is mine. The walls are a calming shade of green I picked out myself. The shelves are overflowing with books I've always wanted to read. There's a peace here that is so profound, so absolute, it feels like a physical presence in the room. This quiet, this calm, this is what I bought with that house. I used a portion of the money for a down payment on this place, a tangible asset that belongs to me and me alone. The rest is invested, a silent, growing testament to my own security, a future that no one can co-opt or complain about. I have a job I actually enjoy, working with people who respect my contributions. My friends are a small, tight-knit group who have seen me through the worst of it. People whose love isn't conditional on what I can provide for them. My life is no longer a series of obligations and quiet resentments. It's just my life. And it is beautifully, wonderfully boring sometimes. The greatest freedom is found in the smallest moments. It's in the simple act of sipping coffee on my own balcony without having to listen to my family argue about money inside. It's the joy of hammering a nail into the wall to hang a picture I love without having to ask for permission. Mostly, it's the feeling I get every night when I turn the deadbolt on my front door. It's not a lock to keep the world out. It's a lock to keep my peace in. The silence they used to punish me with, the quiet treatment I get for not falling in line, has been reclaimed. Now, silence is a comfort, not a void. It's the sound of my own thoughts, my own music, my own contentment. I did get one final update on my family. A few months ago, it came from a cousin who managed to stay neutral through the whole ordeal. She told me they had ended up renting a cramped 2-bedroom apartment about an hour away. Ashley, she said, had to get a retail job to help with the bills and complained about it constantly. My parents were financially strained, and the atmosphere was tense. Apparently, they still tell anyone who will listen that I got angry over nothing and stole their home right out from under them. When I heard this, I didn't feel a surge of victory or even a flicker of satisfaction. I just felt quiet there. Story has nothing to do with me anymore. It's just noise from a world I no longer inhabit. I sold a house, but what I really got back was my own life. I learned that you can't force people to see your worth. You can only refuse to let them devalue you. If you've ever had to become your own hero, leave a comment below. See you.